there's so much of it, and I mean it's infiltrating every part of the world without even really, the farmers even knowing about
Your
it.
friends.
Yeah, it's crazy stuff. So
Yeah, a really good movie on that is called The Future of Food by Deborah Coons Garcia.
yeah,
And she really examines what's happened to like with this farmer in Canada who was sued and lost against Monsanto. And he said he would fight with his last remaining breath to
Yeah.
remain independent from
yeah,
a big corporation. And the farmers in Iowa recently, just a few months ago, banded together to prevent Monsanto from forcing them to farm in a way that they didn't want to farm.
yeah.
They said, this is America for, by, and of the people, not for, by, and of the corporation. So there've been huge protests even in the U.S.
Yeah, I mean, Percy's been fighting Monsanto for over 10 years now, and has pretty much driven his farm into bankruptcy, but he's been able to keep himself afloat by creating these nonprofit organizations to fight Monsanto. So it's pretty bad stuff. And Elliot Coleman, I'm going back to him again and again because I think he's been at the forefront of this for a long time. He's been growing organic agriculture. He's had a small farm up in Maine for close to 50 years now. He has a great quote that says, "The small organic farm is one of the most relentlessly subversive forces on the planet. It is very difficult to control people who can create products without purchasing inputs from the system." And I think that's perfect because ultimately the reason why these big companies hate the small-scale organic farmers is because they can't sell them anything. All right. Even more reasons why we should choose organic food over conventional is that there's increased nutrient content in organic foods. So there's a lot of conflicting studies with this, but by and large, most of the studies are saying that increased nutrient content is found with organic foods. And a 2007 study by the Organic Center is quoted by saying large amounts of organic matter return to the soil in organic farming systems and encourage higher levels of available micronutrients. And then a 4-year European Union study concluded that organic fruits and vegetables contain 40% more antioxidants and had higher levels of beneficial minerals. So, I mean, I think the statistics kind of speak for themselves. There's obviously a much larger, much higher nutrient content in organic food than in conventionally grown food, and that really just goes back to the way that it's grown and the mindset of the farmer, I think. The farmer who is trying to support nutrient-dense soil is one who's also going to grow nutrient-dense plants.
The whole comment about taste, that's really what is at issue here, because with commercially grown produce, they're lacking a lot of the trace nutrients because
Right.
the soil is lacking it. And they're grown for size and for beauty, but they're
Right.
basically waterlogged.
Yeah.
The soil is salty, and so the whatever the fruit or vegetable is waterlogged, but it's tasteless.
Yeah.
So a lot of Europeans that come to America and say your produce is beautiful, but it's tasteless.
Right.
So, yeah.
Strawberries, I think, are one of the best examples
Yeah.
of this. Like, getting strawberries in the grocery store, you have these huge, like, great-looking strawberries, and you bite into them, and they're white all the way through.
Yeah.
And then you go to a farmer's market or something and buy strawberries, and they're tiny, like they're these little strawberries like the ones that we're getting from C.S.C.S here, but they're so rich. They're like ruby red all the way through. They taste so good, So
You can't hear them when you cut them.
What's that?
You can't hear them when you cut them.
Right, yeah, absolutely.
Did you hear strawberries?
Yeah.
My grandparents were strawberry farmers. We
Yeah.
did not hear them. They were fabulous.
Yeah, so I'll get to that in a second here. But another reason, like we were saying, carbon footprint, right? So there's an enormous carbon footprint attached to conventional agriculture and buying conventional produce. Because number one is most of these conventional foods are being shipped hundreds, if not thousands of miles to get to a grocery store. And then all of these chemicals that we were talking about, these pesticides and synthetic fertilizers, they're all petrochemicals. So, and then on top of that, most of the farming, because it's such large scale, relies on massive machinery. So you're getting a lot of chemical or a lot of fossil fuel use with these large-scale conventional farms as opposed to a small-scale organic farm which relies much less on machinery and distributes its produce to very local sources. I mean, it might be traveling 100 miles, if that, So the carbon footprint's a lot less. And I mean, typically organic agriculture uses somewhere between 30 and 50% less energy in production than comparable non-organic agriculture. And that doesn't include the shipping. So that number is going to be even higher, you can imagine, once that food's been shipped 1,500 miles. And then taste. Okay, so we were just talking about that, right? So taste is big. I mean, I think this is something that a lot of people will fight you on and say, well, it's, you know, it's very subjective, and I guess it is. But ultimately, I think that, like Yvonne was saying, it goes back to the micronutrient content in the food, and it also goes back to the freshness too. When you're buying food from your local farmer's market, it was probably picked that day or maybe the day before. Whereas when you're buying some conventional food that's coming from 2,000 miles away, and it's being shipped to your grocery store, it's been sitting on flatbed truck for days on end, and then it sits in the back of the grocery store for a couple more days, and then it sits out in front for a couple more days. So who knows? By the time you get to it, it could be 10 days old. And whereas with small-scale organic agriculture, you're buying very fresh food, which is going to taste a lot better every time. All right, now what about big organic, right? So I think no matter what, when you start looking into where your food is coming from and you're concerned about buying organic and buying more wholesome food, ultimately you reach a point where you start noticing that, especially in recent years, we've seen the growth of these large-scale organic producers, like companies like Cal Organic. They're huge, and really, when it comes down to it, large-scale organic is really just organic conventional, the way I like to see it. So it's just an organic version of conventional. They rely on chemical input substitutes just the same as conventional farming. The only difference here is that they're using organic pesticides rather than synthetic pesticides. But if you were to visit a large-scale organic farm and then go visit a conventional farm, they're really not going to look much different. Generally speaking, they're going to look very similar. The practices are going to be very similar. They generally rely on monocultures, and they generally ignore the ecosystem. They're not looking at the system as a whole. Now, that might not necessarily be true on all farms, but I'd say in general, you kind of have to go back to the smaller organic farms to really see how they're respecting the environment and how they're looking at agriculture as a part of a system rather than something to control. Now, large-scale organic, in my mind, is really just a way for conventional producers to capitalize on a market. So they're really just trying to find a way where they can capitalize on the organic consumer. And they're really just using the same methods, but instead they're pulling their use of synthetic pesticides and substituting it for organic versions of it. Now, it's still better than conventional, and I'm not going to badmouth it too much because it's a way to get a lot of organic produce to a lot of people, which is great. It's much harder to do that with small farms, but there is a better way, and you still need to be a little wary of the way in which your produce is being produced and where it's coming from. A lot of these farms are also shipping their food for thousands of miles to get to a grocery store too. So
I was at one of these farms in Watsonville where they were treating the organic lettuce with chlorine bath. Now I, of course, is a customer, so I'm looking at this going, I don't know, I'm not going to question them, but is that considered okay? I mean, I know they have to kill the pathogens, and maybe with chlorine is the only way, but I know there are other things, peracetic acid, a lot of different things.
Sure, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of other, I don't want to call them chemicals, but there's a lot of other substitutes that can be used in place of the synthetic man-made chemicals that are derived from plant-based materials that are used really just in place. And I mean, I'd never heard of that.
I'm guessing
Chlorine
it's the salmonella issue.
Yeah,
That's exactly
I
right.
don't know if that classifies as chlorine classifies as a synthetic.
Well, there's
chemical.
no gray areas because a lot of the